As 1986 rolled in and the second half of the decade was in full steam, horror was still chugging along with many of the things that it had been doing since the first day of 1980. You had slashers and sequels, sometimes at the same time, and some of the genre's best directors were still churning out classics that we look back on almost 40 years later with reverence. While the Romeros, Carpenters, and Cravens of the world are spoken about with an almost foreboding amount of respect, let's not forget about some of the other ones. David Cronenberg had already cemented himself in the world of horror with movies like Rabid, The Brood, Videodrome, and The Dead Zone. In 1986, 3 years after The Dead Zone, he would give us one of the greatest remakes of all time.
The Fly, rated R, starts Friday, August 15th at theaters everywhere.
One of the most original directors in the horror genre has got to be David Cronenberg. He's just what a twisted imagination, and he's not afraid to go to the dark places.
While John Carpenter's The Thing is widely regarded as one of the greatest horror movies and remakes of all time, it took quite some time to get there. The Fly, on the other hand, had a very successful box office, critical praise, and an Academy Award to its name at the following year's ceremony. While it's a remake of the 1958 classic starring Vincent Price, it's also a different adaptation of the short story released the same year by French-British author George Langlin.
I actually prefer the original Fly, marginally for different, they're very different movies. And that was, there were a couple of remakes that were made during the 80s that were my definition of a good remake. In other words, they completely reimagined the original movie in the source material. They didn't try to copycat it, they didn't try to duplicate it, and The Fly is certainly an example of that.
In terms of Cronenberg's catalog, The Fly sits in an interesting position as it may not be the first thing that people would go to. Newer audiences may think of his prestige movies like Eastern Promises or A History of Violence, while the old school will cite his earlier works like Scanners or Videodrome as his high watermarks. In terms of body horror, though, The Fly delivers on multiple fronts. The movie opens with a booming and whimsical piece from the score by eventual Oscar winner Howard Shore. While the cast is introduced in front of a very science-y background, one name that you won't see is producer Mel Brooks. Yes, that Mel Brooks. While the comedy legend made classic comedies as an actor and director, he also produced some surprising films like The Fly and the David Lynch-directed The Elephant Man.
I think The Fly is another example of people going through changes and not understanding what's happening to us as it's happening.
We see a party where Jeff Goldblum's Seth Brundle is chatting up Gina Davis's Veronica Caffe about how his new invention will change the world. Seeing this as a much younger man, I didn't really care about the burgeoning love story between this confident, attractive journalist and this overly smart but nerdy and self-conscious scientist.
Cronenberg is always looking to do something interesting and pushing the boundaries. I know that people have said that it's about the AIDS epidemic and that it's about how you have a relationship with somebody who's sick and dying. And those things are true irrespective of whether it's about AIDS or not. I think that's what makes that movie so compelling, is that it is about a relationship with someone who is sick and or dying and or changing.
I was here for the gore, because my older brother had shown me the exploding head scene from Scanners, and I knew that this was from the same director.
You ever see that scene in Scanners when that dude's head blew up?
I did identify with Brundle in the nerdy aspect, and so it was cool to eventually see Ronnie fall for him after spending some time together. This was a movie that if you caught on TV, like I did early on, you would be grossed out by the body horror that took place. When you saw the uncut version though, you were probably uneasy enough to yearn for that toned down TV cut. The movie starts out as a good throwback to 1950s science fiction, with character development and a score that matches exactly what the melodrama on screen is presenting. It also has a very science fiction-y plot. Seth is working on a teleporter contraption that is very hush-hush and under the radar. He uses multiple departments to build various things that he needs, but no one in the science community knows what he's working on. This presents a problem with Veronica's chosen profession, but her boss, Stathis Barans, which is a top 10 name of all time, thinks Brundle is all talk. Stathis is really the villain of the movie. Sure, he decides to help Ronnie near the end of the film, but he's incredibly selfish, and a lot of the decisions that he makes lead to the unfortunate problems that Seth and Veronica run into. He also has some of the best lines of the movie, with him showing up in her shower saying that he was feeling scummy.
What are you doing in my apartment?
Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Felt a bit scummy.
This is also about as literal and figuratively accurate as a character can get. The teleporter works, but with only inorganic material. Seth has unfortunately killed a few animals already by the time that Veronica starts to help him with his experiments, and becomes romantically involved with him. He tries to send part of a steak through, and when it comes out, he cooks it and figures out that the teleport pods and computer are just merely recreating a synthetic version of the organic material, rather than just moving it from one pod to the next. After saying that computers are dumb and only know what you program them to know, Seth teaches the correct science to the machine and sends the brother of one of the baboons he turned inside out through, but this time, he is successful. The baboon is very friendly looking and loving on screen, but apparently it was quite the opposite. While all the actors do a great job, I remember the dialogue from the script is surprisingly funny, real, and with just a dash of noir to it. Lines like Stathis feeling scummy or Ronnie mentioning that she still has some residue of a former life that needs to be scraped off adds a little bit of flavor. And lines like these are peppered throughout the entire film.
I still have the residue of another life, you know. I have to scrape it off my shoe and get rid of it once and for all.
While certain parts of the movie were improvised or added by Goldblum and Davis, the bulk of the script was written by Cronenberg and Charles Edward Pogue. Pogue doesn't have nearly the pedigree that his director has, but he did give us the screenplay for Psycho 3 and Dragonheart, in addition to The Fly, so we love him here. His script was extensively rewritten by Cronenberg, who had an agreement to make whatever changes that he wanted, but many important aspects were kept. Makeup effects artist Chris Wallace was no stranger to Cronenberg, having worked in the makeup department in Scanners and on big-name movies like Gremlins, Return of the Jedi, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. That last one is extra evident when Brundlefly melts Stathis' hand in the climax of the movie. It looks nearly identical to the Nazi High Command melting after the Ark of the Covenant is opened at the end of that movie. Wallace went on to work on Arachnophobia and House 2, but was also chosen to be the director for the sequel to The Fly, which came out 3 years later in 1989. I don't think you'll be seeing us cover that one. Everyone knew the special effects were something incredible, but it was after the first few screenings that the crew knew it was better than they had ever expected it to be.
Chris Wallace knocked it out of the park. The effects for The Fly are just tremendous. Watching Jeff Goldblum's transformation from man to hybrid fly creature was, you couldn't look away. It was horrifying and incredible at the same time.
Ronnie runs off to confront Stathis after he sends a mock-up of the Brundle story being blown up after she promised him she would wait, and Seth gets drunk, emotional, and jealous, which leads to him hopping in the teleporter himself. We see what he doesn't, and a fly is spliced within his own genes. This begins the body horror aspect of the film. It really starts at the very beginning, with Seth being somewhat uncomfortable in his own skin. It continues with the slow change to his body, that makes him feel like an altogether different kind of outsider. At first, he feels like he's on the outside looking in within the community, and then, after his molecular transformation, he feels like he's the only one in the world that feels that good.
Another image that I can't get out of my head from The Fly is when he's like doing acrobatics, swinging around a bar in his bedroom or his like loft area. And he's like, I feel great. And he's having sex like one boom after another. It's all like, where's this fly DNA I can inject? You know, we were all asking that question.
He tries to get Ronnie first, and then a girl from the local bar to go through the teleporter, but they both refuse. And on the other end of the spectrum is what Ronnie feels when she becomes pregnant. Yes, you heard that right. Carrying a child can be terrifying in its own responsibility, and a body horror in the way that it forever changes the mother's body. But with the unknown growing in her after we find out that Brundle isn't 100% human anymore, that is horrifying. There's body horror, and then there's body horror. And this movie doesn't shy away from any of it. From the moment that Seth rolls over on a computer chip, which is a foreshadowing of the flesh mixed with the machine that we would get at the end of the movie, to the mercy killing of the Brundlefly. The film is packed with gross out horror that sticks with you long after the film ends. The coarse hairs that grow from Seth's back seem harmless at first, but when they come back as insect DNA, his transformation really begins. From eating seemingly only sugar, to having speed dominate every aspect of his life. The noticeable physical tics are great storytelling before his body starts to really fail him. It has to be said that Goldblum's performance is incredible.
You know, The Fly I think, works so well, not just because of Cronenberg's sense of body horror and his approach towards humanity and the loss of humanity, but because of Goldblum. Jeff Goldblum's performance is amazing. He is riveting to watch. Everything he does in that film is mesmerizing.
I may not have remembered exactly what went on between every character in the movie, but I always remembered his fingernails falling off and him squeezing his swollen finger against the mirror. I would have customers come back to return the movie at the Blockbuster I managed and tell me how taken aback they were when he throws up on his food, or later prey, or when all of his teeth fall out. The biggest thing that I notice now that I didn't before, probably because there was no way it was going to appear in a basic cable showing of this movie, was when he shows off what he calls the Natural History Museum of Seth Brundle. His medicine cabinet is filled with what he used to be. 4 weeks go by and we don't see the day-to-day changes, but Ronnie goes over to talk to him one last time. And as awful as he looks to us, it must be worse for him knowing exactly how his body is changing and fearing what he will become. She wants to terminate their child, and when he overhears this, he kidnaps her from the midnight appointment to have a family together. Or so he says. When they get back, he reveals his plan to have them all go through the teleporter together and become one. His mind has deteriorated as much as his body, and only Stathis can help. He steps in and has his hand and foot melted for his trouble in the first of 8 straight minutes of special effects spectacle. Seth has his jaw ripped off before the big reveal of the titular fly creature, and the horror of Ronnie's face matches our own. When I first saw this thing as an impressionable youth, I was disgusted and elated all in one gasping breath. There are so many different moving parts and gross out effects that it has to be seen multiple times to catch everything. Stathis can avert the teleportation transformation, and Brundlefly becomes one with the very machine that created him, before begging for death with whatever semblance of humanity that he has left. The movie ends without any kind of emotional healing after Ronnie pulls the trigger to end his suffering.
There's a moment later with a shotgun, and they're so emotionally wrenching what happens. It's not a kill, it's a mercy.
Poor Gina Davis, bless her heart, right?
Anyone at almost any age or time in their life will feel deeply for what the characters are going through. from puberty to pregnancy to a major illness and even just growing older. For a movie that was based on a hard science fiction short story and considered a remake of an atomic age classic, the horror found within is something that wasn't seen before and has yet to be matched since, even by the master of body horror himself.
It's a heartbreaking descent. And that's, when Cronenberg's at his best.
Go see The Fly. So good.
Won't let him die. He won't let them live. Trick or Treat.
Starts Friday, October 24th at a theater near you. Consult local listings.
Rock and roll and horror have a history that goes back quite a while, but for the sake of time, we'll give you just a few examples. Black Sabbath, for instance, took their name from a Mario Bava movie, which starred Boris Karloff. Member Ozzy Osbourne would go on to mix horror, and sometimes unintentionally real blood and bats, into his rock persona and music. Personally though, I would say my first taste of horror and rock would be a band called Kiss. Kiss meshed together dark images, personas, and amazing theater into their performances. Kiss's founding father, Gene Simmons, was also a big horror movie fan himself, and originally his persona was called The Vampire, which makes all the blood spewing make a bit of sense now, but it would eventually turn into The Demon. We'll talk more about Gene Simmons later, but like I said, Kiss would pop up late at night with Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park and on the Midnight Special, so I was hooked. Fast forward a few years to the mid-80s, and heavy metal and hair metal were on the rise, as were horror films, and the fans of both had a lot of crossover. During the decade, both would come under fire from conservative religions and government for their content, and supposed corruption of youth. The satanic panic was in full fury, and the souls of fans were the concern of a lot of people who had way too much time on their hands. Horror fans and metalheads are two groups who get a lot of flack for how they dress, what they love, and typically are seen as the weirdos, which we are the weirdos. But we're not the ones you should be scared of. Horror nerds and metal fans tend to be some of the nicest folks around, but also tend to be the most ostracized in film, TV, and real life. So the crossover appeal for these two outlets made a lot of sense, and would also hit a peak in the 80s. The middle of the decade would see a band called Twisted Sister hit the airwaves, loud and proud in their makeup and leather and fight against authority. Dee Snider, another horror nerd, would lead his band into the homes of teenagers and their terrified parents. He'd also lead a charge against the PMRC in 1985, which would lead to the Senate taking on censorship, alongside icons like Frank Zappa and John Denver. If you ever meet Dee Snider, and I recommend it, he's a very cool guy, you should thank him for defending your right to listen to what you want to. That same year, Twisted Sister would release Come Out and Play, which was inspired by the line from The Warriors. That record would feature Be Cruel to Your School, a song including Alice Cooper. The whole record is fantastic, but this song in particular is one that should be of interest to horror fans because of the amazing music video. Like many Twisted Sister videos, it entails people turning into the band. Here, it's Bobcat Goldthwait as a harried teacher who turns into Snider, but his co-teacher is special effects legend Tom Savini, who turns into Alice Cooper. The entire video then turns into a zombie fest of gore and rock, with the undead denizens of the school all designed by Savini. It's glorious and gory, and I loved it. A few years before rocker Rob Zombie got behind the director's chair for feature films, Snider wrote and starred in the creepy flick Strangeland in 1998. 1986, though, would be a massive year for horror and metal. Some might say it was the year for fans of these two genres to come together. Demons 2 would be released in theaters, which is fitting as it's directed by Lamberto Bava, father of Mario, the man whose film would inspire Black Sabbath's name. Also fitting is the unbelievable soundtrack for the movie, which is nearly as important as the effects in it. This included The Cult, The Smiths, and Love and Rockets. While not as awesome as the first film, Demons 2 features a scene that scared the living hell out of me as a kid. I can still remember that demon's face as he walked out of the TV in the girl's apartment, and years later, after forgetting about this sequel, I had to relive that moment while sitting in the theater for The Ring when Samara crawled out of the TV. So thanks for that. Stephen King would direct his first feature film in 1986 with Maximum Overdrive. While King credits some substances to contributing to the crazy ride of the film, he most assuredly credits the mind-blowing music for the movie to his favorite band of all time. When Stephen King asks you to make the entire soundtrack to his film, you say yes. And so, AC/DC said yes. AC/DC's record Who Made Who was also released as the soundtrack to Maximum Overdrive, and it is glorious and wails as loud as the engine on the Green Goblin truck. It added a whole other level to the movie, and the band wound up with some massive hits from the release. I mentioned Alice Cooper earlier, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about the man, the myth, and the legend. Personal story, I nearly died going to an Alice Cooper concert when some dipwad decided to T-bone the car that I was in. The group that I was with decided to still try to make the concert, even though one of us had a concussion. We missed all of Alice nearly, only catching his last song. But such is my love for Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper decided back when he started his reign as a rock and roll god that rock music had plenty of hero types and good guys, but what it didn't have was a villain. Cooper was a massive horror movie nerd, and that helped feed his incredible stage shows and persona. In the 70s, he'd even get Vincent Price to be part of his TV special The Nightmare. In the 80s, Cooper took his love of horror and crossover to a whole nother level. In 1986 specifically, Alice Cooper became part of one of horror's biggest franchises when he would sing and star in the music video for the song He's Back, the man behind the mask for Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. The song is killer, pun intended. The music video is also fantastic and pure 80s awesomeness, intercutting a lot of scenes from the film. Alice terrorizes a couple of moviegoers while also being terrorized by Jason. It may or may not have a bit to do with why Part 6 is one of my favorite Friday the 13th films. That and Tom Matthews rules, but I digress. Cooper would later, in the following decade, become part of another legendary horror franchise as Freddy Krueger's father in Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. But we will get to the better Nightmare outing in a minute. But that didn't mean Cooper didn't have his own horror movies to star in. In fact, in the mid-80s, he'd appear in 2 of them. Prince of Darkness would be released in 1987 as part of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy of films. Cooper's role in the movie is fairly silent but very creepy.
It's a really fun, simple, intellectual, gritty horror movie that of course has Alice Cooper and somebody getting green devil piss in the mouth and turning into a zombie.
But in 1986, he'd be the star of his own film, in a role rather perfect for him as a rock and roll star named Vincent Raven, who goes back to his childhood home to film a music video and instead run into a werewolf. The movie is called Monster Dog, a Spanish production that was released on VHS that year. Cooper specifically wanted to do a low-budget horror flick, and he got his wish with this one. He also performed 2 songs for the movie, with the music videos within the film being one of the highlights. The titles were Identity Crisis and See Me in the Mirror. However, the 2 songs actually wouldn't be available on any release until 1999. Monster Dog is interesting. It's worth it just for the weird factor of Alice Cooper basically playing himself and the bad dubbing that is all over the film. The filmmakers were inspired by American Werewolf in London and The Howling. But I personally love the fact that Cooper chose it because he wanted something down and dirty and sleazy if he was going to do a horror film. That's my Alice Cooper. Speaking of A Nightmare on Elm Street, we have to mention the glory that was Dream Warriors when it hit in 1987. Dokken took on Freddy Krueger and scared the Dream Demon as they wailed loud and proud about how they didn't want to dream no mo. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is a favorite of many Elm Street fans, but this song has a special place in our hearts because it's just so damn cool to not only have Jason, but Freddy showing up on MTV like that. Let's head back to 1986 again though, because I want to give some love to what is probably the pinnacle of metal and monsters coming together. Trick or Treat came at the perfect time, with the Satanic Panic in full swing, and the myth of satanic passages being hidden within records if you played them backward. Trust me, this was a thing that a lot of us tried when we heard it, because we really wanted to know how hard the devil rocked. I have already briefly spoken about this one in a previous memory, but how can I not talk about metal and horror without mentioning Trick or Treat? Like I said before, the movie absolutely rules. The movie tells the story of metal god Sammy Kerr, who, after dying in a fire, is brought back to life as an avenging demonic ghost after his fan Eddie plays his last record backward. Eddie has to now stop the evil entity that was once his hero before he kills his fans and the people Eddie cares about. The late Tony Fields played Sammy Kerr. Fields also appeared in the Michael Jackson Thriller video a few years earlier. Mark Price of Family Ties fame was Eddie. Gene Simmons, I told you we'd be talking about him again, was the rock DJ Nuke. And Ozzy Osbourne cameos as the Reverend Gilstrom. It turns out that Simmons was actually offered the role of Sammy Kerr, but didn't take it. Instead, he took on the role of the DJ, because he was a fan of the legendary Wolfman Jack, one of the greatest DJs of all time, no lie. Kevin Yeager created the special effects for the film, including the burned look of Sammy Kerr, something he would later do again with his work on the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I wore out my cassette of the soundtrack to this movie when it came out. The music was performed by the band Fastway, and it was just their 4th record. I loved everything about this movie, and I also loved the music. It rocked hard. But sadly, when Trick or Treat and Sammy Kerr came out, they didn't hit as hard as some of the other horror icons at the time. In fact, the movie was forgotten for quite a while. Eventually, some other fans and I were able to find it on a bare bones DVD released back in 2002. Since then, there has been a very limited Blu-ray release in 2014, but that is literally it for fans to be able to see it now. A couple of years ago, though, something started happening. Sammy Kerr was getting a bit of attention thanks to fans who remembered the music and the monster, and Fright Rags releasing a line of Trick or Treat shirts and goodies. In fact, Trick or Treat would pair perfectly with the 1988 monster flick, Black Roses. You didn't think we'd get this one, did you? Black Roses, much like Trick or Treat, was a skewering of the satanic panic induced by the concerned religious right in the 80s against heavy metal. It seemed odd when the popular band Black Roses comes to a small town for an extended stay, until you realize the band is made up of demons who create chaos, death, and destruction via their now possessed fans. Black Roses, the fake demonic band of the same name in the movie, actually had 4 songs they recorded in the film and on the soundtrack. The rest of the soundtrack included the bands Bang Tango, Lizzie Borden, and King Cobra, to name a few. Joe Bob Briggs and The Last Drive-In helped introduce some new fans to this flick recently during their Heartbreak Trailer Park Valentine's Day special last year. This would also include the glorious Stick Shift Drive-In love song and music video, because Joe Bob also rocks hard. And there you have it, my fellow metal monster heads, a walk back through the record stacks of the 80s, when slashers and guitar smashers came together for some killer tunes. I'm still sporting my black concert t-shirts with pride, and somehow still fit in them. As a matter of fact, even though they're from my high school days. Horror nerds could always find a kindred soul in their metal-loving brethren, and sometimes they'd sell that same soul if they meant they could get some great front row seats. Keep slashing and thrashing, kids.
Friday the 13th, Part 6. Jason Lives, rated R.
Starts Friday, August 1st. Check newspaper listings for a theater near...
It's so interesting, like when I look through, the movies that I'm gravitating towards are horror comedies or horror that have comedy in them. Because I would argue, you can't have a comedy and sort of put a little horror in. That kind of upsets the mix. The recipe doesn't work. But if you have a horror movie that really does deliver on the horror elements, but then have the comedy come not from making fun of horror, but having characters that are funny, that can make commentary on the horrific situations, that's where the real, or irony, you know, situations that have ironic elements that are fuel from the horror tropes, then it works.
Horror comedy movies have been around since the dawn of film, so of course you didn't have to wait around until 1986 to see one in the 80s. Student Bodies, The Stuff, Once Bitten, The Toxic Avenger, these all blended horror and comedy elements to one degree or another.
Likewise, Larry Cohen's The Stuff is another one. Are you eating it, or is it eating you? What a great tagline. What a great tagline. So much fun. And I think that's one of the things that you usually go back to the movies that are the most fun to watch.
But as you go through the 80s genre output, it seems like things got sillier and more outrageous as the decade passed, building up to a horror comedy explosion in 1986. This is the year when producers decided we needed not just one, but 3 separate horror movies set on April Fool's Day. There was Slaughter High, Killer Party, and the one that was actually able to use the title, April Fool's Day. All 3 have a comedic edge to them, and each one leans into the pranks and goofiness of the date that they're set on. Slaughter High has a man in a jester mask seeking revenge on the bullies whose prank went terribly wrong. He stalks them through the halls of their old high school, which is somehow fully equipped with bedrooms and a bathtub. Killer Party starts out by pranking the audience, giving us 2 fake-out opening sequences. One is set at a funeral home, the other is set at a drive-in and becomes a music video. Then we get to the actual story about possession and murder on a college campus. April Fool's Day is the best and most entertaining of the bunch, gathering a bunch of college students, including Amy Steele from Friday the 13th Part 2, together on a private island. It soon appears that a killer has set out to murder everybody. The climactic twist seems to be the dividing line that decides whether or not a person is a fan of this movie. Some hate the twist and feel that it invalidates everything that came before it. Others, like myself, feel like it's the perfect wrap-up. The ending makes this movie truly unique amongst 80s slashers and more satisfying than it would have been otherwise. It gives a reason for all the kills being off screen. And if you can't laugh along with the twist and be entertained as the characters party to Three Dog Night, well, I'm sorry that you don't like fun. 1986 saw Troma follow The Toxic Avenger with Class of Nukem High. Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner went on a haunted honeymoon. There was the hodgepodge mess of a cult favorite called Spookies. We got the From Dusk Till Dawn precursor Vamp, where Chris Makepeace from Meatballs and Getty Watanabe from 16 Candles go to a strip club, which turns out to be infested with vampires, including an otherworldly Grace Jones. Future Full Moon founder Charles Band brought us Troll with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Sonny Bono, paving the way for the infamous sequel in name only, Troll 2, which by the way, Band had nothing to do with. He was, however, responsible for the wild alien invasion via satellite television movie Terror Vision. This is packed with memorable, ridiculous dialogue. Speaking of alien invasions, this is the year when the Krites, that's critters to you and me, first visited our planet. Steve Miner brought us the comedic haunted house movie House, which was followed by an even more comedic sequel the next year, House 2: The Second Story. Fred Decker wrote the story for House and also wrote and directed Night of the Creeps, which sent the legendary Tom Atkins after zombie college kids who rise from the dead under the influence of alien slugs. If there's one person you can count on to scare the hell out of you, it's the literary master of horror, Stephen King. He even showed up on screen in the trailer for his sole directorial effort, Maximum Overdrive, so that he could promise what to do what you expect him to.
I'm gonna scare the hell out of you.
Yeah. Maximum Overdrive doesn't exactly do that. Admittedly, fueled by copious amounts of alcohol and cocaine, King made a movie that splashes a whole lot of goofball insanity across the screen. Getting viewers to be afraid of sentient big rigs would have been a tall order for any filmmaker. But there are a few moments in Maximum Overdrive that try to be unnerving at least. I remember seeing this on TNT back in the day and being very bothered at this scene where the kid gets run over by a steamroller. At that time in my life, I had always assumed that kids were off limits in horror movies. And most of the film is a display of dopey characters, amusing dialogue, and hammy acting, including an opening scene cameo by King himself that really sets the tone for what's to follow. One of my favorite movies of '86, actually one of my favorite movies period, is Trick or Treat. Starring Mark Price, you might know him as Skippy from Family Ties, with appearances by Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne. This one is a must-watch every October. It follows teenage outcast heavy metal fan Eddie, whose rock idol, Sammy Kerr, dies in a fire. But then Eddie discovers that he can communicate with Sammy's spirit by playing his last album backwards. There are some dark, unnerving scenes as Eddie interacts with Sammy from the afterlife, gradually realizing that his hero is an evil being who can't be trusted. Then Sammy is able to physically re-enter our world, and when he starts zapping people with his electrical powers, we're not exactly in full-on horror territory anymore. The movie awesomely goes off the rails. This was the year that we got a musical adaptation of Roger Corman's 1960 horror film, The Little Shop of Horrors, with Rick Moranis in the lead, Steve Martin as a sadistic dentist, and appearances by John Candy and Bill Murray. Roger Corman's wife, Julie, contributed to the horror comedy proliferation by producing Chopping Mall, a Jim Wynorski joint with prominent roles for genre regulars Barbara Crampton and Kelly Maroney. This one was the same wish fulfillment setup as Dawn of the Dead. It follows a group of characters who have an entire shopping mall to themselves outside of business hours. Unfortunately for them, this mall has top-of-the-line security. A trio of robots patrol the place, zooming around on their tank treads. They're supposed to be non-lethal guards who will neutralize burglars with sleep darts and tasers. But when a lightning strike fries their computer system, the robots turn homicidal. They proceed to hunt down the trespassers, electrocuting them, shooting them with laser beams, blowing their heads up, and telling their corpses to have a nice day. It's a blast. Any day where you can spend 77 minutes watching Chopping Mall is a nice one. '86 was also the year the horror comedy approach infiltrated two major franchises with glorious results. We'll start with a movie that I owe my horror fandom to, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. I was only 3 years old when this movie hit VHS, but I still remember the day my teenage sister came home with her then boyfriend and rented a copy of Jason Lives. When they put the movie on, I sat down to watch it with them. Things started out fine, but when a lightning bolt resurrected iconic slasher Jason Voorhees, and he rose from his grave, putting on his hockey mask and starting his latest killing spree, I freaked the fuck out. Since I was screaming and crying, they had to stop the movie and leave to go watch it at the boyfriend's place. But despite my negative reaction, I was hooked. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. I had my mom rent us our own copy of Jason Lives just so I could give it another try, and this is how horror became my favorite genre. Writer-director Tom McLaughlin brought a great sense of humor to his Jason movie. Tasked with bringing the slasher back from the dead, he took the Frankenstein route, and that's just one of the several film references and homages in the movie. There's a self-referential crack from a character who's seen enough horror movies to know that any weirdo wearing a mask is never friendly, and a drunken caretaker who breaks the fourth wall to note, "Some folks have a strange idea of entertainment." There are nods to Sean Cunningham, John Carpenter, Mick Garris, and Boris Karloff, and even a parody of the James Bond gun barrel sequence, with Jason standing in for 007. There are amusing moments throughout the film, but despite the extra level of humor around him, the character of Jason is always taken seriously. He's always a dangerous element in a scene, never the butt of the joke. And this allows for some stalking scenes that are effectively suspenseful. Jason's played by CJ Graham this time around and racks up a high body count in the film, slashing his way through everyone that comes through during his journey from the cemetery back to his home turf of Camp Crystal Lake, which is now up and running again under the name Camp Forest Green. But critics like Siskel and Ebert had made such a big deal about the violence in these films that the ratings board cracked down on them. At this point, not much gore could make it to the screen. So when you combine the quickness of the kills and the lower level of bloodshed with the humor, not to mention a lack of nudity, it actually makes Jason Lives a decent gateway horror film for kids looking to get into the genre. It could be the next step beyond movies like Gremlins and The Monster Squad. Or if you're like me, you could just dive right into this one. It's well written and clever. It features some good acting and strong leads in Tom Matthews as Tommy Jarvis, a character who returns from the previous 2 Fridays, and Jennifer Cook as his love interest Megan. It also sports some of the best cinematography and production value of any film in the franchise. The shot of Jason standing on top of a burning RV wreckage is one of the greatest images we've ever seen of the character. Thanks to Jason Lives, I started renting my way through the horror section of the local video stores. As a preschooler, I was already a fan of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, an '86 release that perfectly balances its over-the-top humor with a strange horror atmosphere. Director Tobe Hooper had seen the first film as a dark comedy. As it gained a reputation for being one of the scariest, most disturbing films ever made, he was disappointed that so few people pointed out the humor in it. So when he directed the sequel, he intended to make the humor much more obvious. He and writer L.M. Kit Carson definitely succeeded at that. And Bill Moseley helped with his insane performance as a character named Chop Top. Most Chainsaw movies deal with young people on a road trip. This one shines by taking a different approach. The young people on the road are the first victims, murdered by the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface, but they happen to be on the phone with a radio DJ called Stretch at the time. And the sound of them being killed has been recorded by the radio station. This gets Stretch, played by Carolyn Williams, mixed up with Dennis Hopper's character Lefty, a former Texas Ranger and the vengeful uncle of characters from Part 1. And when Leatherface and Chop Top come busting into the radio station, this also becomes a story of unrequited love. Leatherface has a major crush on Stretch, and I mean, who can blame him? When Stretch and Lefty follow the killers to their lair, built in tunnels under an abandoned amusement park, it's like a descent into hell. The set design is spectacular, and these sets are dressed with an impossible amount of human remains. These characters have apparently killed enough people to populate a small country. This is the logic of haunted houses and nightmares. It's like a visual representation of the killer's twisted mind. But while Chainsaw 2 is brutal, gory, and disturbing, its character interactions are hilarious, especially when we see Jim Sidow's Cook character dealing with his brothers Leatherface and Chop Top, or when Stretch tells Leatherface that their relationship just won't work, giving cliche, "it's nobody's fault" breakup lines. The movie's sense of humor is divisive, but I think it's brilliant. I loved it as a 4-year-old, I love it even more as an adult now that I have a better understanding of the jokes. There were more horror comedies to come in the remaining years of the 80s, including franchise entries that upped the comedy element. 1987 brought the gleefully hilarious Evil Dead 2, the Elm Street films got increasingly humorous, with Freddy Krueger dropping one-liners for every kill, Phantasm got a sequel with laughs and a 4-barrel shotgun, and Sleepaway Camp got a couple of comedic follow-ups. If you wanted your horror to be deadly serious, there were still options to choose from. But if you enjoyed horror comedies, there were also many laughs to be had. What do you think of the horror comedies of the 1980s? Does the humor in movies like Jason Lives and Chainsaw 2 work for you? Let us know by leaving a comment, because we want to know all about your 80s horror memories.
I strongly suggest that any filmmaker who wants to make a horror movie respect the audience. They are very smart. They love what the genre brings and what it does for them. So honor them. And then if you use that as your foundation, you can do all kinds of really interesting things, because horror is psychology. So you can do anything and plug any different character or situation as long as you respect that base. So a little tip from an old man.
Aliens. This time, it's war. Aliens, the new movie. Rated R.
Aliens is a brilliant sequel because it's one of the few sequels that takes the premise and the mythology of the original film and leaps off in a totally different direction successfully.
The sequel to one of the greatest horror movies of all time.
I should be clear about one thing. I've seen Aliens more times than maybe any other movie ever made. I owned a VHS copy of it back in the day, and I'll be damned if I didn't wear that thing out after a few short years. Plenty of movies went through the same ringer. Halloween, Star Wars, RoboCop, but none so much as Aliens. There was something just so explosive about it. A shocking combination of action, science fiction, horror, and even drama that takes your stomach, bundles it up in knots, and doesn't let go until the end credits roll.
I don't know, I'm this much of a nerd, but if you go on YouTube now and you type in Aliens first time and reaction, you will watch people who are completely unfamiliar with Aliens and its power seeing it for the first time, and all it will do is allow you to remember what you felt like when you saw Aliens for the first time, because it's fucking awesome.
It's a powerful experience even if you've seen it 100 times, and it helps shape an entire generation of movie geeks. Think about your best buds from back in the day and tell me that they weren't just as enamored with Cameron's film as you. While there were so many movies that helped shape our tastes and love for the genre, Aliens had a particularly intense impact on our minds. Part of the appeal is that there was just nothing else like it at the time. Perhaps 1987's Predator could be seen as a close relative, but Aliens transports us into a frightening and lonely world where one never feels safe or comfortable. It's like a haunted house ride that lasts well over 2 hours, and by the end of it, your nerves have been thoroughly shredded, and you're quite grateful for the experience. Truth be told, when I was a young one, the original Alien was almost too grim of an experience to handle. It's so dark, so hopeless, so creepy. It might have been the scariest horror movie I'd ever seen at the time. I vaguely recall Aliens coming out and doing gangbusters, but I was honestly a little intimidated by it. If the first movie was scary with just one alien, how could I handle the sequel, which features a platoon of the vicious buggers? Eventually, I prepared myself for battle and watched the VHS of the movie. Safe to say, I haven't been the same since. What sticks out about those early viewings of the movie is that it messed with my emotions so effortlessly that my adolescent mind was actually impressed. I don't think I'd seen a movie that was somber 1 minute, then funny, then suspenseful, then horrifying, and back again for another round. You get the point. This wasn't just a thriller where things popped into frame every few minutes to give you a cheap thrill, but something closer to a nightmare, where a chance to breathe a sigh of relief was very hard to come by. At the risk of sounding pretentious in terms of a movie-going experience, it was pure cinema, a work of art that beats the hell out of you. My younger self appreciated that, and I sure as hell do to this day.
What also astounds me about Aliens is that what they achieved, it had such a big feel, that film, and it's all practical effects. I mean, that whole film is practical effects.
Of course, a handful of years later, the director's cut of the film would appear on Laserdisc. Talk about revelations. They don't get any bigger than that. Taking an already punishing movie of 2 hours and 17 minutes and adding 15 minutes to that, expanding upon Ripley's story while introducing brand new elements, such as showing us the colonists on LV-426, was a gift from the gods for us Aliens fans. That's the definitive cut of the movie, no doubt, but our discussion here can be applied to either version. They're both classics as far as we're concerned. Naturally, I never knew who the mad genius behind this masterpiece was. The Terminator was a seminal movie for me as well. Another incredible film that cleverly combined action, science fiction, horror, and drama. That film's director, James Cameron, quickly became a name to watch for cinephiles, and his much anticipated follow-up would be carefully examined. As we very well know by now, Mr. Cameron never half-asses it. When he yells action, he means it.
And the thing about Aliens that I love is when James Cameron went in to pitch to get the sequel, all he did was go in and on the whiteboard, he wrote Alien, then he added an S, and then he added a $sign. And they were like, understood, we're done.
And it turned out that making a sequel to an instant classic like Alien was not going to be taken lightly. It would be a true sequel in the sense that it jumps off the ingredients the first film gave us, in this case, the setting, the villain, and most importantly, a hero who takes no shit from anyone, human or alien. Setting this movie 57 years after the original, Cameron's able to open the world up, add more characters, and ramp up the action while still maintaining the original's atmosphere of dread.
Now, the original Alien was the first R-rated movie I've ever seen. That was my first. That broke the seal. So obviously it had a huge impact on me because it's unbelievably well done. But if there was ever a slow burn, it's Alien. It's 2 hours long, and it takes a long time for shit to happen. I don't think audiences today have the patience. Unfortunately, the current culture has really whittled away allowing characters and situations to marinate so that when you do get to those big moments, they have more impact. Aliens was the inverse of that. You drop the needle in the middle of the record and you are off to the races, and that's okay. Aliens is still 2 hours and 20 minutes long. It's a really long movie, but you don't feel it at all because Cameron paces it so relentlessly.
Another debate that we can have is whether or not Aliens is an action movie, a science fiction movie, or a horror movie. Well, in fact, it's really no debate at all, because it's absolutely all of those things in one grisly package. There's no doubt that there is more action, in the traditional sense of the word, in this one as opposed to Alien, which was definitely more of a horror movie through and through. But for my money, Aliens also absolutely belongs in the horror section of the library, because underneath all that gunfire is a terrifying tale about a group of people being eliminated one by loathsome creatures who either kill or impregnate them. Monsters burst out of chests, facehuggers pop out of nowhere, and acid blood is sprayed freely, melting the human flesh that it lands on. Yes sirree, this is a horror movie. It just happens to have a fair share of explosions as well. And action horror movies aren't exactly easy to pull off, because the two genres are often at war with each other.
Also, as a metaphor for the U.S. involvement in Vietnam and how we sort of let the troops down, there's a very clear-cut message in that movie if you're willing to look for it. But more than anything, it's got that double, triple ending that just takes you by the throat and thrusts you into the action in a way. There's this, I can't say enough about Aliens. It's so good.
But leave it to Jim Cameron to be an expert on the matter, or splatter. Let's talk about Ripley. While Alien made Sigourney Weaver a star, Aliens is the movie that confirmed Ellen Ripley was a character for the ages. In the first Alien, Ripley is a smart, proactive member of the crew who is often the stick in the mud, the voice of reason who rubs everyone the wrong way. She's the one who gets things right at any cost, which makes it no surprise that she's the sole survivor of that doomed mission. The Ripley we reunite with in Aliens is ultimately an immediate icon. When we meet her, she's dealing with PTSD, mourning the loss of her daughter, struggling to make ends meet, a sad, lonely life without much purpose on the face of things. Naturally, when asked to help with a rescue mission and possibly confront her toothy nemesis once again, she's not exactly in a rush to do so, but in order to conquer the demons in her mind, she's got to do it, and we believe it, even if it's a plot convenience for her to agree to go back. As Ripley, Weaver runs the gamut of emotions, from remorseful to angry to compassionate, and everything in between. Ripley never seems like less than a real person for even a second, and she's got our sympathy every step of the way.
Well, first of all, Sigourney Weaver, can we just say that she was a badass superhero without ever having to, as a woman, without ever having to say, I'm a woman, I'm going to be a strong woman in this movie. She was just a hero, and I think we owe her something for crossing the gender line in heroes, and doing it with such grace and without anger and without a fist in the air, just saying, there's a problem and I need to help fix it.
Sigourney Weaver received an Oscar nomination for this performance, and for the Academy to recognize a horror film in an acting category tells you everything that you need to know about Weaver's excellent work. Ripley is still the kick-ass movie heroine that all others are measured against. But don't get me wrong, the rest of the cast is absolutely vital to the film's success, especially since it's such a sizable ensemble. It would be easy for Cameron to make the soldiers dispensable, one-note nobodies, but he gives us a handful of intriguing characters who are more than they initially seem. Michael Baine's Hicks at first fades into the background early on, not making as much of an impression as other more showy personalities that take center stage. But after the shit hits the fan, we see that Hicks is a natural-born leader who's able to maintain his cool under immense pressure, and Bain gives a realistic portrayal of a grunt who reluctantly rises to the challenge. An unforgivable character comes in the form of Private Vasquez, and let's be honest, a lot of us had never seen a lady like this before. Perhaps the most physically intimidating character in the film, her introduction is an eye-opener, easily doing pull-ups that would make most dudes tremble. While she's not exactly a multi-layered person, Vasquez has our attention throughout, thanks to her stone-faced heroics and determination to save what's left of her squad. Leave it to Cameron to not be satisfied with just one imposing female in his arsenal. And do I really have to give a shout out to Bill Paxton? Don't we all know how amazing he is in this and any movie? Yes, I do, and yes, we do. Interestingly enough, Paxton's Hudson might be the most memorable human character after Ripley in the movie. Starting off as an impossibly brash loudmouth who talks a big game, he's almost immediately revealed to be a childish wimp when the going gets tough. And to be fair, you can't really blame the guy after some of the stuff that he sees go down.
This isn't happening.
But the movie lets Hudson regain his composure as it moves along. Cameron isn't content to just let him be an annoyance who deserves to die ASAP. The tragedy, of course, is that just when Hudson gets his balls back, he's done in by the aliens, who don't really give a crap about character arcs. Still, Paxton is absolutely perfect casting for the role, and it's an understatement to say he's still missed to this day. Other faces emerge distinctly. Carrie Henn as Newt, the little girl who braves it all. Henn's performance isn't necessarily an all-timer, but give the kid credit. She's dealing with a hell of a lot in front of and behind the camera. That we care about Newt just as much as Ripley does is all that matters, and no doubt Henn makes that happen for us. Lance Henriksen also cuts a very memorable figure as the android Bishop.
Thank you.
About whom we're slightly nervous considering the events of the first film and its sinister artificial human. Henriksen displays just enough emotion to gradually get us on Bishop's side, and his heroics at the end of the film give us a reason to truly appreciate the misunderstood fellow. It still just might be Henriksen's definitive role. And then there's Paul Reiser as Carter Burke. Burke belongs to that very special class of horror movie villain.
Paul Reiser, the evil corporate America at work, who'd fuck over anyone for profit and pays the price for it.
He's not the big bad, but he's a detriment to our heroes and a sniveling, underhanded weasel to boot. We're talking slime balls like Frederick Chilton in Silence of the Lambs, Dr. Cruz in Friday the 13th Part 7, Rhodes in Day of the Dead. These guys are monsters in human form, and we simply cannot wait for them to get their just desserts. Burke is at the top of this particular class. Not only is he responsible for unleashing the alien on the colony, killing dozens of families in the process, he learns no lesson from his deed and keeps on shilling for the soulless company that he works for. Sounds very 2023. Even being a witness to a mass slaughter doesn't change the bottom line for Burke, as he's willing to sacrifice every last one of his human companions just so he can suck up to his corporate overlords. Best known for his comedic chops, Paul Reiser crushes it as a spineless tool, without a shred of human empathy. Burke is an asshole for the ages. When he meets his fate, the universe cheers. The film's finale was, for me, the most enthralling part of the entire adventure, and it's certainly etched into all of our minds forever by now. Ripley racing to save Newt, meeting the fearsome queen, the close call escape while James Horner's Bishop's Countdown epically blares over the soundtrack, and then, of course, the showdown for the ages. Bad Mama against Bad Mama in a battle for who's really the queen of the galaxy. Of course, we know who the crown belongs to, although it's too close for comfort at the very end. And as an aside, the alien queen remains one of the most awesome practical effects in movie history. It's a real shame to think that they barely make them like that anymore. Thank the gods that we still have this one, gone hurtling through space to her doom, but not close to being forgotten.
The escalation of that movie, how it escalates, how when you finally get to the battle with the loader and, you know, Ripley and the loader and the alien queen, it's just like, oh my God, you've even if you didn't do that, that movie's amazing. If you ended it when they just left the planet, that movie's amazing. When you do that sequence, you said that it's why so much of that franchise got fucked, because that set the bar too high for anybody else to be able to follow. And, you know, it's like Alien 3, I pity those fuckers. You know, there's no way you're gonna even come close to that, because how can you? And that franchise has never risen to that height again.
There are only a handful of movies that stick with you in the same way they did when you were first warming up to them. Those are the movies that work on us on all levels. Emotionally, intellectually, viscerally. Aliens is one of those films. From the simple but crafty screenplay, to the superb cast, to every person on the tech side working at the absolute peak of their capabilities. With The Terminator and then Aliens, James Cameron announced to the world that he was no ordinary director, but a man on a mission to blow us away each time we went into one of his movies. He has, as of this writing, not stopped doing that. His legacy is already very much in place. What's his best movie? Well, that's another one of those debates that we could have. And what a challenging one that is, because there are several candidates, but I know the one that truly changed things for me, that will forever be one of the defining movie experiences of my life. That's Aliens, one of the best 80s horror memories a guy could ask for.
One of my favorite films of all time, Aliens. And I got to puppeteer on Aliens. So I got to be on that set and see that stuff happen. And that was just incredible to have a front row seat to that movie making history. I got to puppeteer in the scene in the med lab when they're checking out the face huggers, and one of them lunges against the thing. I'm helping with that, and its tongue is like, bleh. And then I also got to do a little bit of Queen puppeteering in some of the Alien Queen sequences. There were quite a few puppeteers in those scenes, about eight of us. And on the days that I would show up after school or on weekends, Stan would always say, hand him a controller, show him what to do. And I got to help puppeteer the Alien Queen in a couple moments, and that was pretty awesome.
This is the work of an all-American visionary and a master film stylist, Stephen Schiff, Vanity Fair. Blue Velvet, rated R.
And there's a black hole in my memory, which is Blue Velvet, a movie that just absolutely blew me away.
The horror genre was changing in 1986. With slashers becoming oversaturated, things got weird. David Cronenberg took on The Fly, Tobe Hooper brought the return of Leatherface with a very unexpected sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, yet he also contributed a little sci-fi fun with Invaders from Mars, and let us remember a monstrous man-eating plant who sang a few tunes in Little Shop of Horrors. Ah, what a decade it was. So where does the legendary David Lynch fit in? While it was already such an inventive time when it came to genre, Lynch offered us the descent of a young man obsessed with a lounge singer. And he indeed discovers that sometimes you may want to give your obsessive nature a break. This dude certainly poked the bear. And that bear is Frank. A brilliant performance from Dennis Hopper. Okay, if I'm being honest, I freaking love David Lynch. In fact, while I had seen The Elephant Man, it wasn't until I watched Roger Ebert famously give the film a thumbs down that I was instantly curious.
Sure, the movie's well made, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked it.
And yes, the strange and dreamy feature that merged comedy, violence, mystery, and a sort of 50s apple pie attitude had its hold on this viewer. Blue Velvet was such an impactful feature on this young cinephile, and frankly, it brought me a little luck. A few years back, when I came to explore the underbelly of Hollywood, I had an audition for an independent comedy called The Almighty Fred, and I was young and dumb but excited to meet director Bill Kellman to discuss the upcoming flick. I was coming in to read for a stoner character, and because I was currently obsessed with Lynch, we talked about the strange beauty of Blue Velvet, Eraserhead, and Wild at Heart. And yes, I got the part. Blue Velvet also left an impression on me that was unexpected. Living in a small town with a few secrets of its own brought a little intrigue and fright. I could relate to that character of Jeffrey Beaumont, wonderfully played by Kyle MacLachlan. He was just as ridiculous as most young men who begin to pick around where they shouldn't. And don't play innocent with me now. Most film lovers can relate at least a little to the character's absurd need to investigate. Why has this flick become so legendary? Its dreamy storytelling and disturbing sequences with Dennis Hopper terrorizing Jeffrey, especially Isabella Rossellini's Dorothy Valance. Having recently revisited this flick with friends who had not seen it, the comedy that exists within the sadism is quite unnerving. However, Lynch's day in Bizarro Land style won't fully resonate with Lynch's oddball storytelling lunacy. I can't get enough of it. Blue Velvet tells the story of a bored young man who decides to do something foolish and creepy. And he even gets a local high school girl who has a crush on him to help him break the law. Ah, young love. How sweet. But that's what makes Lynch's work so damn infectious. Even the hero is a bit of a weirdo in his cavalcade of crazy. However, in-depth storylines are not what makes this filmmaker's work so freaking interesting. Blue Velvet opens with a very pretty and happy portrait of a small town. Hell, every resident here is so friendly that they break the fourth wall to wave at those of us peeking in. White picket fences adorn beautiful, safe homes filled with families all doing their civic duty. This little slice of small-town America is a delightful place. Well, until it's not. Kyle MacLachlan plays college student Jeffrey Beaumont, a young, aimless man who comes home to help his hospitalized father. Once there, he takes over managerial duties at his pop's hardware store and throws rocks at some random shed. This dude is seriously aimless, guys. He finds an odd object while selecting another rock to toss off the dirty ground. Covered in insects, he eyes a human ear. So, of course, he does what any sane, sensible human being would do, right? Nope, the dude picks it up and brings it with him. Wait, did he just pick up a freaking human ear? Sorry, this Jeffrey guy is kind of a moron at times, but this movie wouldn't be nearly as amazing if this fool had made better life choices. What is his big idea? Why is Jeffrey hanging out with the underbelly of society?
Did I understand it all? No.
Again, Jeffrey is bored. Since the high school girl's father is an officer, he asks her to keep him posted on what happened to the human ear that he picked up. The next step for him is to stake out a possible connection to the cut-off ear. It involves a mysterious nightclub performer named Dorothy Valance, who's played by Isabella Rossellini, and my oh my is she stunning in this. Well before he helped David Lynch make a damn fine cup of coffee, and got famous as Dale Cooper in Twin Peaks, young Kyle MacLachlan was a regular performer for Lynch. The actor had appeared in the fascinating mess that was David Lynch's take on Dune, and he would also take on this curious role. And frankly, he makes it work.
If you think Blue Velvet was Lynch's follow-up to Dune, right? And you know, Blue Velvet, you could see the guy who made Elephant Man making. Certainly, you know, the guy who made Eraserhead. But Dune, you know, it's an interesting. It's like he reclaimed his artistic integrity.
And speaking of a great cast, just look at the many talented folk who live in Lynch's dreamy nightmare. You have Laura Dern, Dean Stockwell, Brad Dourif, Jack Nance, and one insane performance from the wildly entertaining Dennis Hopper, who also appeared in Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 that same year. No wonder horror folk tend to dig that guy.
Dennis Hopper, Blue Velvet. Oh, I'm slutty. Oh, I'm slutty.
Let's talk about the luminous Isabella Rossellini. What's fascinating about her performance is how strange this woman Dorothy Valance is. When we first get a glimpse of her on stage, seductively crooning the tune Blue Velvet to those in attendance, it's a gorgeous vision. Her singing voice perhaps may not ignite a flame, but it truly works for the character. As we learn more about her connection to Frank, Dorothy becomes all the more compelling. When Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert reviewed this one, the latter wasn't keen on Miss Rossellini's treatment. Even decades later, I'd rather not spoil the outrageous finale that finds this stunning woman completely nude outside the home of our hero. Let's just say that Mr. Ebert did not understand the humiliating nature of the moment.
But he asked Isabella Rossellini in this movie to be undressed and humiliated on the screen as few actresses ever have been, certainly in non-porno roles.
And one of the things about Blue Velvet that I love the most is just how almost oversaturated the visuals are and how he understood how to use the visuals. When you see the beautiful, happy township and you kind of track down and you reveal the worms and the creatures and the disgusting things underneath, right then and there you know that you're going to be watching a movie that is going to force you to ask some questions you probably don't want to know the answer to.
Before I jump into the frightful Frank, what's up with that dude from Quantum Leap lip-syncing to Roy Orbison? Aside from Stockwell's stunning performance, he quickly lets the psychotic Frank and his goons take Jeffrey on a joyride. But it's not one you'd want to take, trust me on that one. Blue Velvet comes together like a vivid dream lost between 50s nostalgia and 80s camp. As intriguing and as offbeat as it is, it still holds up. If anything, the humor of it is far more appealing than I remember it being. As a nutty kid who loved the obscure and the uncomfortable when it came to keeping things freaky in flicks, my love for this film and the rest of his filmography continued to grow. If you've never witnessed Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, or Wild at Heart, they are all must-own for this fan regarding his fascinatingly offbeat style. And yes, Eraserhead is a classic that will creep you the fuck out, but not in ways you might expect. And also yes, Blue Velvet has many of the charms that his excellent series Twin Peaks offered. The small town has secrets, and all the players seem to have a ton of skeletons in the closet. It may not be for those looking for a more straightforward storytelling, but for fans of Lynch, the man is an artist who rarely plays by the rules. Seeing the seeds of what would become Twin Peaks is a fascinating experience. Stepping back into Jeffrey Beaumont's departure into the darkness is still a tasty cinematic treat. Lynch takes chances with his work, rarely going for the predictable or the obvious. His appreciation of music adds another layer to his surreal journey.
And of course the emergency light sequence with Dean Stockwell, the candy-colored clown they call the Sandman, is pretty standout.
About a week after seeing the film, I'm running a bath for myself in my apartment in London. I was on my own, so I am naked, and I'm the bathroom door is open and the radio is on in the kitchen. And as I leant over the bathtub to put the plug in, I hear in the background the candy-colored clown they call the Sandman. In that moment, I'm gripped by utter, abject terror, and I don't know why. And my head is racing, and the rational voice is saying, "You've known this song for 20 years. You love this song. Why are you? Oh fuck!" It's that, and I think that's enormous credit, that somebody can put something in your head that it'll terrify you all over again a week or so later, without you even being aware that that's what is upsetting you so much.
At a time when the horror genre was attempting to find a new direction, Blue Velvet fit perfectly into the mix. It's a bold film that relishes its tawdry dive into the disturbed. I loved this film. It's not the perfect fit for everyone, as is most of Lynch's work.
We've all got used to this with the lovely Mr. Lynch over the years. It's a wonderful mind fuck. No idea what was going on, but thank you.
Yet this may be his masterpiece for those who appreciate the auteur for his uniquely Lynchian images. And yes, I use the word Lynchian for a David Lynch film. If you love delving into the unusual and surreal, Blue Velvet is a journey you will not regret. Whether in dreams or not, this is one of the best features to gain notoriety in the 80s. And more importantly, it became a gateway to a director that I'd end up putting very high on my list of cinematic favorites.